Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Chief Learning Officer webinar, sponsored by Open Sesame. I hope you're all having a wonderful start to your week or a great week so far, and that you're all excited as I am for today's webcast, Navigating the Tech Landscape: Insights for 2023 and Beyond. My name is Michaela, and I will be working here in the background to help answer any general or technical questions that you may have. So before we get started, I just want to go over a few key reminders for the attendees. So first, all of your audio will be streamed through either your speaker or your headphones, so please make sure you adjust your volume there accordingly. If you have any questions or you experience any technical issues throughout the webcast, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you have technical questions, the answer will appear there. And any content-related questions for our speakers will be read at the end if time allows. Also, don't forget that you can chat with your fellow attendees by joining the live attendee chat. And finally, you will receive a link to the recording of this webinar along with certification codes for the webcast in a follow-up email. So please allow at least 24 hours after the conclusion of this event before that information is sent to you. So now at this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's webcast, Oliver Huggins, VP of Partnerships at Packt. So Oliver, I'll go ahead and let you take it away. Oliver, I think you're on mute still.
There's always going to be one thing. It's the one thing that plagues me with all of the Teams meetings that I join, and that's being automatically muted. Thanks again to Open Sesame for this fantastic opportunity to share a webinar on State of Tech in 2023. My name's Ollie. I'm VP of Partnerships at Packt. If you don't know, so Packt are an IT publisher. A lot of our products, books and videos are available on Open Sesame, and I lead the partnerships team there. I joined Packt probably in 2014. My background's actually in product management, so I joined Packt looking after their subscription proposition, moved over to look after the publishing team, and now have the joy of working with partners. And I think some things to know about me: I'm obsessed with technology, which is partly why I'm probably in the job that I am in. I love to play and listen to music, obviously, with the background you can see behind me. Fun fact is that I used to work in the music industry, and I used to work for the label who originally signed the Killers. And that's about as sexy as my life got, and it was all downhill from there, working in the world of tech learning. What I'm going to do today is walk you through a report that Packt put together in May 2023. We were really interested to understand more around how the advancements in AI and LLMs are impacting job roles across the world, across all of the different technical professionals that we build content for. We wanted to understand what the key challenges to jobs are in 2023. Technology is always changing, and the challenges facing people's roles is constantly evolving. And alongside that, we wanted to see what are the emerging tools, topics, and things that individuals are looking to learn in the year ahead. Other things that we pay close attention to are things to do with cloud vendor preferences and looking at what services are of key interest for people. Obviously, as the world moves to a cloud economy with Microsoft Azure and AWS and Google Cloud, cloud vendors are increasingly important. And then finally, we'll look at the influence and frequency of interaction with key different content types. Technical professionals and people learning tech are all different, and some of them have preferences towards video content and text content. So I'm going to dip into a little bit of that and talk you through some of our findings. Just to give you an overview of the survey that we completed, we surveyed around about 1,300 technical professionals based across the world. What you can see in front of you is a breakdown of the demographics of where those people have come from. So you can see in the countries there, the broadest proportion of our respondents came from the USA. And then within the technical professional groups, you've got people representing development and programming, data, decision makers in there, people who are CTOs, people who are CEOs, administration and networking, cybersecurity and architecture. And then you also have a breakdown on the right-hand side of those individuals based on their employment status as well. At the end of this session, I'm going to send you all a link to a downloadable PDF of this report that has a lot more content and richness within it that enables you to effectively work through the insight and the report at your convenience. And what I'll try to present today is more of a broad sweep across some of the major themes that we've seen. So to begin with, first, I'm going to cover the impacts of AI and LLMs. At the end of each section, what I'll do is I'll offer some time for people to ask questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to try and follow along where possible. And then we'll look at the tools and topics in 23 to 24. We'll then go into cloud platforms. Then we'll review content preferences, and I'll wrap it up with a key summary, and we can close for some further questions. So without further ado, I'm going to talk you through the impact of AI and LLMs. So just to give you a little bit of background, evidently this year's been, it's been major for the evolution of what's happening in the world of AI with the release of, ChatGPT-4, it becoming far more mainstream, and you beginning to see individuals incorporating that into their workflows to improve things like productivity and to automate lots of manual tasks. We've seen some big macroeconomic shifts in things like the book market. So a lot of our revenue as an organization and as a publisher comes from Amazon. And we saw a little bit of disruption around kind of that period between March to May. And that prompted a lot of what we wanted to ask developers and technical professionals about in terms of questions. And one of those key questions we wanted to see was how these advancements in AI and LLMs were impacting people's roles. So throughout the survey, what we did was we gave people the option of providing open text responses, which created a bit of a nightmare for me and the rest of the team, who had to then pour through those responses and then thematically categorize what people were saying. But what it meant was we were able to slice and dice and look at that data in a lot of different dimensions. And then the first thing to say is that most tech pros still don't see any impact to their role from AI and LLMs. So you can see on the right-hand side there with the pie chart of the proportion of individuals that are seeing no impact at all is around about 54%. You're then seeing a very big swathe of the respondents who are also indicating a positive impact, and then a small portion as well there that are seeing negative impacts. I don't have the data on the screen at the moment because it gets relatively detailed to pour into, but a lot of the themes that came out in terms of the negative impact were individuals who had their jobs replaced by LLMs or automatic AI-generated processes. We also saw a lot of respondents from cybersecurity professionals indicating that there have been increased threats to systems with the advancements in AI. I'll break down what the positive impacts were beyond this, but I think there's a key message in this in regards to either there is no genuine impact from the advancements with what we see with tools like ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot, or there's a lack of education. It's something for us to be aware of, and it's something that we're thinking about as a publisher in regards to how well we can equip our target audience with the skills and capabilities they need to really leverage the benefits and advantages of what these new LLM-enabled tools are providing. When we look at the detail of the positive impacts that people have seen in regards to AI and LLMs in their roles, the biggest themes that come up are improving problem solving and also productivity. You can see in the bar chart to the right-hand side all of the different themes and all of the different types of advantages and benefits that people have seen with these advancements. I'm just going to answer a really quick question in regards to what LLM stand for, and it's going to be acronym soup throughout this presentation because unfortunately tech pros love an acronym. LLM stands for large language models. That is, models which are trained to help provide outputs that can effectively model human language. So the best example of that you see is with ChatGPT, which is effectively a large language model. It has been trained on millions and billions of pieces of text, and it understands something about the context of what that text has been created for and what the sentiment is around it, to the extent where I can ask it using regular conversational English, write me a screenplay involving 2 characters that's no more than 2 pages long in A4, which is on the theme of marriage, and it will spit out that output as accurately as it can. It's particularly curious because GPT also hallucinates outputs in regards to the fact that if it doesn't understand the what the ideal answer will be, it will effectively fill in the gaps to assume what it thinks the answer might be, and in some cases provides outcomes that aren't necessarily true or accurate, but are portrayed as true and accurate. So in regards to those advancements, there's some things that we can see here in terms of themes outside of the problem solving and productivity, but they're all kind of tangentially linked. Things like faster code generation. You see this with like GitHub Copilot and Amazon Code Whisperer, where effectively people can use natural language to write whole scripts of code. Now that's going to open up a lot of challenges and problems moving forward in regards to people QAing and quality testing code that's been created by organizations. But evidently, when leveraged and utilized in the right way, it can really speed up development processes. We see things like improved communication. We've seen this a lot within our team as well at PAX, where people are using tools like GPT to improve their email writing. Things around improved creativity, helping to solve problems, improve customer experience with the release of things like chatbots, improve data analysis in regards to being able to push some data into the model and it tell you what the outcomes are without somebody having to pour manually through that data. But chiefly, towards the end, you can see process automation, productivity gains. They're the key things that are going to lead to positive impacts in both organizations and then within those individual developers' lives on a day-to-day basis. In regards to the breadth of AI tools out there in the world, we asked respondents which tools they were actively using in their roles. And without any massive surprises, ChatGPT came out among the leader of those AI tools, along with GitHub Copilot as well. If you look along the list, you can see there's also obviously a lot of usage around things like OpenAI Codex, which is effectively OpenAI's version of what Copilot provides in regards to being able to use natural language to create code. And then you see there things like DALL-E, which is OpenAI's LLM, which can help you to build images from text prompts. Midjourney, which does very much the same thing. Bard, Google's answer to GPT. They're all tools which are functionally doing the same things, but created and managed by different vendors. But the things to watch are probably GitHub Copilot and GPT. GitHub Copilot in particular, because Microsoft has obviously purchased GitHub, and GitHub Copilot is being integrated into Visual Studio Code, which is an IDE that developers are using on a day-to-day basis to actually write their code in. It changes the nature in terms of what that LLM AI-enabled capability is able to deliver, because it's situated within some of these actual working environment on a day-to-day basis, whereas ChatGPT is something you have to navigate to in order to use. And we see GPT Copilot being pretty much commonly used across the data cohort, the cybersecurity cohort, and the development and programming cohort as well. Moving over to tools and topics, before I go on, I just want to offer people an opportunity to drop any questions into the chat in regards to any of the things that I've highlighted around impacts of AI and LLMs. I'll give you about a minute to write any messages. If I don't see any, then I'll move on to talking about tools and topics. But I'll just give you an opportunity to write some questions. So I've got one question from Eric, who's curious about intellectual property and also copyright. And we are also very interested in intellectual property and copyright. I will say, so we're in discussion with a lot of other publishers at the moment in regards to what the implications are around intellectual property and copyright. From Pat's perspective, we have identified instances where ChatGPT has effectively trained and leveraged content created by Pact. And the reason why we know this is Pact as a publisher has a very specific division which focuses on new and nascent technologies, where we will publish on a specific new and emerging technology, and no other content will exist in the world with the exception of the content that we've created. And the sheer fact that that exists within ChatGPT as an output indicates that they have effectively scraped our content. Packs aren't necessarily big enough to want to take on the might of an OpenAI. Our view is that larger organizations will begin to make that march soon. Our perception is that copyrights and intellectual property laws will be changing dramatically over the next kind of 3 to 5 years. We're in the foothills of that change at the moment. You can see and track things like the lawsuits from Getty Images against tools like Midjourney, which are effectively leveraging and utilizing images that are copyrighted. One of the things that we're focused on developing at the moment is capabilities that let us enable and build LLM functionality, but also map attribution and royalties back to original creators. That's part and parcel of who we are as publishers. So it's something we're very interested in. Are AI tools capable of generating XAPI code? That's from Velshko Roshkar. So that's another interesting question. An arm of Pact that I work in is focused on what we can do to automate the creation of SCORM packages and looking at XAPI outputs. We're experimenting at the moment. I think reasonably everything is feasible. It will be possible in theory in the future to build whole SCORM wrapped courses using AI. But at the moment, our focus is around effectively the transformation of existing content we have into SCORM-based XAPI outputs. The traditional way in which we will create a SCORM package involves an individual logging into a product like Articulate Rise, going through, adding all of the text, all of the videos, all of the multiple choice questions, when in reality, all of those assets exist independently. And we're effectively paying individuals to go through and manually pile those assets together into a package. So we're looking at what we can do to automate that, what we can do to automate things like the compression, automate things like the generation of transcripts in multiple languages. We think that's probably the most exciting way we can leverage AI at this moment in time. There's no more open questions, so I'm going to move on to talking about tools and topics in 23 to 24. There will be a little bit of repetition because, surprise, surprise, ChatGPT came out as #1 as one of the top tools that people who worked in the development and programming tech pro group indicated in 23 to 24. At the same time, the key takeaway from our perspective is that Python continues to be one of the most popular languages to learn if you're a developer or a programmer. We say this because we run these surveys year in, year out, and I would say for probably the last 6 years running, Python has always emerged at the top. And I think that speaks a lot to its versatility as a language. The fact that you can leverage it for web development, you can leverage it for programming, you can leverage it for like full stack web development if you're using frameworks like Django or Flask. But most importantly, its application and use in data. I mean, data is king. 2023, 24, 25, beyond. Everybody's thinking about what they can do with their data and what you can do in regards to ML processes to innovate and build recommendation systems and new things like chatbots. That's why Python's kind of still top. Below that, you've got things like GitHub Copilot, which we spoke about before, Kubernetes, OpenAI, Codex, Golang, AWS, JavaScript, Java, and DALI. The things to note in there, I think, are a lot of these tools are oriented around automating existing processes. So Kubernetes is focused on orchestrating infrastructure. So these are all tools that are moving in the direction of taking a tech pro's job and simplifying whole components of it to make it easier, so that it effectively enables them to do more and be more productive in their roles. When we ask people from the data cohort, again, lots of similarities in regards to the tools that they identified. Things like Python, ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, Bard, SQL. Interestingly, things like Power BI came up quite high. If you've been following Microsoft recently, you would have seen that they've released the Fabric interface where they're bringing together their Power BI products, which is used for creating business intelligence reports, and they're bringing that together with their data warehousing product to effectively own all of the data space within an organization. So as these cloud vendors are beginning to consolidate all of their kind of tools into single solutions, there's a move that they're trying to take customers on towards kind of vendor lock-in. Below that, you've got tools TensorFlow, which you use for basically managing out ML processes. You've got blockchain, Amazon Apache Airflow, and then CodeWhisperer at the bottom as well. When we ask people in cybersecurity, again, lots of commonality: ChatGPT, Python, CodeWhisperer, all those tools which are built around basically automating and being able to quickly generate new outcomes. Aside from that, you've got Kali Linux tools oriented around things like penetration testing, Kubernetes and Terraform. There's an interesting move we see with cybersecurity professionals thinking a lot about the orchestration of infrastructure that you see with Kubernetes and Terraform, which speaks to some of the potential vulnerabilities around code involved in those processes. Some other feedback that we've had from cybersecurity professionals has been around the vulnerabilities introduced into systems as a result of leveraging tools and processes and services that are built for convenience. So it's something they're having to be mindful of. It's something that they're having to protect against. But below that, you see obvious tools that they'll be using to manage endpoints, Microsoft Defender and Microsoft Sentinel. Moving over to think about topics. So topics being distinct from tools. The top topics that we saw developers and programmers wanting to learn in 23 to 24 was all the things we're probably all aware of around AI, LLMs. Web 3.0 came out on top as well. It's just so to bring everybody up to speed. Web 3.0 paints a vision of a decentralized internet. It's not necessarily a thing that exists currently in the world, but it's something that people are thinking about and what the ramifications of that will be moving forward. So that's applying a lot of the systems and processes that you see with blockchain, but applying that to the way the internet is structured. Then things like cloud architecture, as developers and programmers are becoming empowered with all of these new services and tools, they're not having to think as much about the day-to-day coding, but are having to think a lot about how the architecture works in regards to how different systems and different services plug together and can enable them to achieve outcomes. Again, aligned with that, you see them thinking more acutely around things like domain-driven design, functional programming, system architecture. Quantum programming made the list, but is more obscure and a bit more future-like in regards to quantum programming is oriented around effectively leveraging a lot of the tools that IBM have built around being able to develop systems and programs using quantum mechanics. I won't delve into the details of what's involved, other than to say, when quantum becomes mainstream, it will enable people to be able to run processes a hell of a lot faster, and they will be able to model scenarios and model systems in far more detail. So when you're thinking about, if I'm a biologist and I'm trying to model how genomes work, and I'm thinking about that level of detail, that's where quantum programming, quantum machine learning is really kind of going to drive the future of what the art of the possible is. Below that, things like cross-platform application development and cybersecurity coming up. I'm just going to quickly jump into some of the questions in regards to some things I didn't necessarily address before. One of them from Mary was around the use of GPT with language translations. How's it being used for this now? What's the accuracy? ChatGPT isn't really being used for language translations as of yet. I've got theories in use about language translations. So Amazon has some native services that you can use that do a really good job of basically using AI to generate outputs for translations. And we're using it at the moment for some of our transcripts to take, say, English transcripts and turn them into Spanish. When it's working with, say, European languages like English to German or English to French, you can get a degree of accuracy in the region of 80 to 90%. When we've tried to do the same thing from moving from English into, say, Korean or simplified Chinese, the accuracy percentage drops down to around about 50 to 60%. So I would say it's not there yet, but I do think a future will exist in the longer term, say the next 3 to 5 years, where the accuracy just continues to improve. One of the biggest barriers that people will face with translations, especially in the world of tech, is that there is a whole vocabulary around technical terms which will not be incorporated into any models built by AWS, most likely. So therefore, there's a space that exists in the market for the organization that's able to make and translate technical literature so that it's accurately translating terms like .NET or LLMs or Web3 in the right way. The other question I've got from David is lots of tools being added to LTI, H5P, Turnitin, and Perusall. I agree. I guess it's less of a question and more of a statement, but happy to share that. The next list of topics we saw from data professionals who wanted to learn more about ML, AI, NLP. This should all be fairly obvious and make sense. This delves down into the detail of what goes into creating tools like ChatGPT, things like natural language processing, things like developing neural networks to improve the training of data so that these models and these outputs can become more accurate over time. One of the emerging themes I think that everybody's going to have to be thinking about soon in real detail is around AI ethics. Thinking about what data your model is trained on is going to be increasingly important because it's very easy to train a model on biased data sets or data sets that only ever lead to very specific outcomes and get yourself into a whole lot of hot water in regards to what the outcomes and outputs of those models are. So thinking about how you use AI for good and how you program things like morality into AI will become increasingly important for people to both think about and consider. So say, for example, if somebody asks ChatGPT today, how can I cover up a murder? There's an AI ethics element to that will involve ChatGPT not being able to answer certain questions. Outside of that, the other things to think about for data professionals is around cloud data, data governance, and data warehouses. All of the cool and exciting things that data professionals want to do with AI and machine learning and natural language processing is hampered if you don't have data that's structured in the right way and organized into a system that enables you to really exploit the benefits of it. So that's why governing data, making sure your data is clean, making sure there's a strict process of how data is updated is really important. Think about where your data is stored and thinking about how you approach the process of how you mine for data as well. Extra question from Mary. How is AI being used for accessibility, especially closed captioning? What tools have the best accuracy? AI isn't being used much for accessibility at the moment. The best use cases you can see for AI in regards to closed captioning would be tools like Veed. So Veed is a video creation platform. You can go into that, add a video, and it will auto-generate captions for you. The best processes that I've seen and services available in terms of generating closed captions for videos exist within Amazon's suite of services. That's what we're using at the moment. We are building a custom model that enables us to accurately translate effectively tech information and tech videos to a degree of 99%. And we'll have that hopefully available in the next couple of months. Finally, cybersecurity professionals, topic-wise, things that they're interested in are themes like artificial intelligence, again, for obvious reasons, LLMs, XDR and SIEM, which I always have to remind myself it's basically extended detection and response. And then SIEM stands for security information and event management, which are basically two sides of the same sword. They're looking at the same things in regards to preventing and detecting threats before they happen. XDR is obviously the more advanced version that offers a holistic solution in regards to protecting key infrastructure from being attacked by flagging issues before they arise. And then thinking about things like cloud security, EDR, red teaming and penetration testing, which again are part and parcel of the same process. Red teaming is the concept of developing attacks to identify what vulnerabilities exist within your systems, and then thinking through things like compliance and regulations, and also threat hunting, offering bounties to individuals to identify vulnerabilities and issues within your platform. We see a lot of appetite among the developers within our cohort to want to basically meet those bounties as a way of generating revenue. That comes to the end of the tools and topics in 2023 to 24. I'm going to go through and try and address some of these questions. While I'm addressing them, feel free to add more into the Q&A or into the chat directly. I'll try and reference both. So John Bartleson asks, are you seeing the greatest investors in AI being global military forces? Disregard just answered the above question. I don't see global military forces investing in AI. I think in terms of the macro picture, we are seeing a huge demand for AI and ML content in Asia and Pacific regions. There are theories in use that there's a lot of catch up playing in regards to getting up to the same speed of what I guess you've seen as innovations wise within the US around tools like ChatGPT, DALL-E, and GitHub Copilot, which are all fundamentally based in the West Coast of the US, because we are seeing that demand. Any other questions at all? I think Mary's questions about accessibility and closed captioning I've answered, hopefully. I'll give you a few more seconds to ask any other questions. If I don't see any, I'll move on. David. David's question about don't forget generative AI in images and copyright laws. These integration give university IT organizations a lot of stress due to ethics and security. This should be watched. I totally agree. Not only obviously from an images perspective, we face that challenge when we have lots of diagrams and pictures within our published titles, which are obviously copyrighted, and then we see crop up in different places online. But also the actual pure content as well. It's becoming harder and harder to identify what content is being plagiarized. Our theory and use is that people with more sway and influence than ourselves will also identify this and begin putting processes in place and writing legislation to prevent it happening to such an aggressive degree. I would say the direction of travel that we see for GPT and other similar LLMs is that a lot of organizations we've spoken to have prevented their teams from being able to access or use it as a tool. And the main reason for that is because obviously any information that you input into ChatGPT-4 automatically becomes available and consumed by the model. So therefore, people need to be very careful about adding sensitive information. So there are a lot of financial companies that won't let their users use it. All this basically points to a situation in the medium to long term where organizations are going to have to think about building their own privatized LLMs if they want to have that same functionality and that same kind of convenience, but not make sensitive data that they have publicly available. I think ChatGPT just released a new privatized version of their model, which doesn't train the model based on the inputs going into it. So the world's already beginning to move into that direction. Okay, next section is to focus on cloud platforms, really big platforms that are effectively dominating the way in which we think about tech. One of the questions we asked was what cloud platforms people are currently using in their role. So we saw a really big spread of platforms being leveraged, like Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, Elastic, Oracle Cloud. Obviously, within your organizations, you will know which cloud vendors you're leveraging and using. But what's interesting is how this picture is shifting over time from a place where people weren't using cloud platforms at all to a place where they were using one, and now to a place where they're actually using multiple cloud platforms. So you can see there the number of platforms selected by people by proportion of respondents. You've got over 20% obviously saying that they have one platform, but then you've got over 20% saying two, you've got over 18% saying three, you've got around about 4% saying four, and then a smaller proportion saying five. That shows a massive switch to people using multi-cloud, where close to half of everybody that we spoke to is now leveraging multiple cloud platforms. So what we're seeing in the world is where cloud platforms and cloud vendors are beginning to specialize in very specific areas. In regards to the different combinations that we saw people using, AWS and Google Cloud Platform came up as a really common combination, Azure and AWS together. AWS features pretty commonly across most of the multi-cloud setups. So it's something to think about in regards to the like learning and development needs of an organization, because it's not just a case of your organization is going to be Microsoft centric, let's do everything in Azure. When you have new cloud platforms emerging, things like Snowflake or things like Elastic, where they are providers and provisioners of services that they do better than any other cloud platform, AWS themselves are making things easier to plug between different cloud platforms because they respect and identify and know. And in reality, people aren't vendor locked into a single platform. So therefore, the needs and challenges around learning is just extended. The other challenge is around the pairings of these different components and these different combinations of cloud will also change the learning requirements. So understanding how Azure plugs into AWS is a completely different piece of learning to how AWS plugs into Google Cloud Platform, say, for example. So it's an important thing to be aware of. Then in regards to what people are looking to learn more about in regards to cloud computing in 2023 to 24, people place a special emphasis on artificial intelligence and ML, and then also cloud security. The other big things that came out were things around cost optimization, automation, governance, infrastructure as code, automation, migration, monitoring, and network storage. If I was to encapsulate all the themes, there is a really strong theme around people being able to do more with less. One of the things that cloud platforms have enabled developers to do is they're effectively taking highly complicated systems and services and abstracting them into tools and capabilities that almost anybody can use. And you see this with low-code applications, things like Microsoft Power Tools, where somebody that doesn't have BI training can go into that system, build an application, and build a report that comes off the back of it. That same thing is happening with artificial intelligence and ML, which means if you've got a full-stack developer, they're no longer just a full-stack developer. They're thinking about things like security concerns. They're thinking about things like AI and ML. And one of the things that's driving this from the business perspective is the fact that there are so many cost optimizations that can be incurred by effectively upskilling your team in all of these different disciplines, and then not necessarily requiring the level of detail or the capability to individually execute on some of these aspects. So you don't need to necessarily a Python programmer in-house to build an ML model to help you build a recommendation engine. Suddenly a full stack developer can go into Amazon and say, click a button saying, build me a recommendation engine from this data. So the world is changing, but AI and security are coming out top in regards to the things that people are really thinking about. The other future developments within cloud computing that people are looking forward to, going back to what I mentioned before, one of them is quantum machine learning, which is a really exciting future cloud development because it improves dramatically the speed and capabilities of which and how machine learning can work. So again, I don't want to have to necessarily explain quantum machine learning and also quantum computing because I don't necessarily fully understand it enough. But effectively, it enables you to 5x, 10x the speed and performance of what systems are able to do within the cloud. So these are highly complicated supercomputers, not dissimilar to the way supercomputers probably were formed in the 1940s and 1950s, but that can be accessed and can be programmed via the cloud. So suddenly someone like me in Birmingham in the UK can access this supercomputer to basically do these really advanced programming systems. So as soon as this starts to become mainstream, it just, again, means things can happen far more faster and far more performative. Other future developments that people are looking for are things like cost savings, AI-driven coding, security improvement, edge computing, expanded storage, hybrid cloud. When you're a full stack developer working within these cloud systems, the things you have to appreciate is that your company doesn't give you an infinite budget. And I have this with one of the developers that works within our team who's looking at the automated transcription process and also the auto generation of SCORM packages. In regards to some of the bills and the costings from players like Azure and AWS to process some of our information could reach up to like £250,000 a year. So therefore, the sheer cost of using the cloud becomes a real limiting factor. So evidently, one of the things that people are looking for are cost savings within these platforms to make them more accessible and to enable people to be able to do more things. Just touch on the other things that we're beginning to see now with the release of tools like Amazon Bedrock is that LLM integrations are a really exciting future development that enables people to effectively plug in LLMs like ChatGPT into existing Amazon services that people are running at the moment. So let's say, for example, if I'm working in an organization and we have a Twitter feed and I want to generate sentiment analysis for all of the different tweets that our company is receiving on a day-to-day basis, if I have all of that information being fed into AWS, I can then hook that up automatically to GPT, and it can tell me whether it's a positive, neutral, negative sentiment, what the tweet is about, automatically assign that to a tag that then goes to somebody in the CR department who can then pick that up and deal with it faster than they would be able to if someone was reading manually through the tweets on Twitter. So things like this are beginning to shape the way the world's working. That comes to the end of the section around cloud. I want to give people an opportunity to add any questions or insights that they have around the things I presented there. Again, I'll give you about 30 seconds. If I don't hear anything, then I'll just move on to the final section, looking at content preferences. Okay, conscious of time, I'll go through the content preferences and then we can come back and circle around at the end for any questions. So one of the things that we wanted to understand was the frequency of engagement that tech pros have with different content types. And this will be really important and interesting for people within your roles to understand because it tells you where they're going for information. So we created a Likert scale to show the frequency of usage across content. So we're looking at newsletters, we're looking at blogs, white papers, ebooks, online courses, podcasts, infographics, YouTube, project documentation, Q&A sites, live labs, practice questions, webinars. And one of the things we found most striking was that tech pros are most frequently engaging with both short form text and also video. So firstly, you see a huge portion of people regularly looking at things like newsletters and blogs as part of their day-to-day routine. Newsletters are fantastic as a mechanism for basically content learning because it's pushed straight into your inbox. You can look at it. It's not going to take any more between 5 to 10 minutes to scan through and read through, and you leave there with some insight that you can carry through throughout the day. Same kind of thing goes for blogs. There's a real convenience around the types of content that people are using more frequently than not. So things like YouTube coming up really strongly, people obviously referring to project documentation frequently throughout the day. And the things that they're looking at more infrequently are around, things like live labs, going through practice questions, looking at webinars, reviewing infographics, going through white papers, listening to podcasts, and going through online courses. When we filtered that by decision makers, so individuals who were decision makers within their organizations, we found that there was a higher leaning towards text-based content. So we saw big jumps in the number of people looking at newsletters, looking at blogs, and then again also looking at things like project documentation and Q&A sites. One of the things we found in terms of how influential those different content types were in decision making, that ebooks, documentations, and also online video courses came through as very influential within the decision making. You can see there in terms of the Likert scale that you can see both ebooks and online courses were either significantly influenced or highly significantly influenced on people's decision making skills. The same thing goes for project documentation. And you can see the influence of tools that they're obviously accessing very frequently, like YouTube, obviously drops down quite a lot. One of the interesting things for me is you also see little influence on things like webinars. You see it on blogs, and you also see it on newsletters as well. So we found that interesting to look at. When we filtered that to decision makers, we found a far bigger skew towards people being influenced by courses, with online courses having a very highly significant influence on people, alongside things like core project documentation created by vendors. That brings me to the end of the overall presentation. Obviously, we're coming up to 45-minute runtime now, so I want to try and give us at least 15 minutes to work through questions. So just to summarize some of the kind of key points from the presentation, time constraints and rapid innovation posing big challenges to tech pros with the speed of development of AI and LLMs. We are beginning to see a positive impact on productivity and problem solving as a result of those new technical innovations. GPT, GitHub Copilot, and Python are reigning among those tech tools wanting to be learned by tech pros. And there's that takeaway that decision makers are more likely to be influenced by courses and documentation. One of the things we put together, so we've compiled all of this research into a PDF, which is available for you to download. I'm going to take this link and paste it into the chat so everyone has it for reference. But what you can do is go to the page, just fill in some details, and you can download the report, which is there as a PDF that contains more narrative-driven explanations of all the different charts. So you have that for reference, and you have that to take away. But other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll open up the opportunity for people to ask questions about what we've been looking at. So Jennifer Cardillo asked the question, you mentioned that decision makers are influenced by ebooks, documentation, courses, and documents. Which providers are the leaders in providing access to this type of content? So in terms of ebooks, you've got obviously publishers like Pact, that's our bread and butter business. You've got other big publishers like O'Reilly and Manning Publications, No Starch Press. They're all great providers of quality ebooks designed for tech pro audiences. In regards to the documentation, I'd urge you to just refer to the actual core documentation of the tools being leveraged and used by your team. In a lot of situations, the documentation provided by large vendors is extraordinarily good. So I point to Microsoft Learning as a resource. For all things to do with Microsoft, they've released some new courses and plans which are all free to use. The incentive on their end is that they're trying to encourage as many people to use Microsoft Azure as possible. But the documentation and the actual courses they put together are absolutely fantastic. Then you've got obviously Microsoft Docs available there. We work really closely with a lot of other kind of large vendors like MongoDB, Snowflake. All of their core project documentation is really strong. To be honest, if your team is using a tool and the project documentation isn't strong, probably shouldn't be using that tool. When it comes to courses and documents, obviously Pact provide a lot of courses to Open Sesame currently. I can refer you to those. Big course providers that you see in the world outside of the things that you have available would be courses on like Coursera. But principally, a lot of the things we've been talking about today, one of Pact's mandates is to build courses and build ebooks. They're as highly relevant and always up to date with what's happening in tech at the moment. And that's all available as part of the partnership that we have with Open Sesame. In terms of documents, I can refer you to the other things I've spoken about before. Just referring off to another question from John. Did your survey include analysis on which commercial off-the-shelf LMSs are being utilized the most widely? As you know, there is no shortage for Slowform. Unfortunately, our survey wasn't built for that specific use case. One of the things I'll bear in mind for the future, because I'm hoping this could be a session we deliver in the longer term with Open Sesame again, is we'll get some far more LMS specific insights, especially around how developers are using that, and present that information back to you. But at this moment in time, I unfortunately don't have that to share. David's asked, I have suggestions for managing the cost of subscriptions for GPT tools so that there is a level playing field for students. Does the school pay, or the divisions have nots due to a cost can create a lot of academic review inquiries as it relates to fairness? Any suggestions? I'm not up to speed in terms of how academics are approaching what's happening with tools like GPT. In most situations, the use of GPT as a tool has been effectively started by the students directly, rather than being indicated as a tool to be leveraged by, say, an instructor or somebody who works within the actual institution. I think it's one thing we need to think about carefully in regards to what role LLMs and tools like GPT play within academic institutions moving forward, especially for those institutions that have very coursework-based curriculums, where it becomes important to mitigate and be vigilant against people plagiarizing content. Jennifer asks, what are the key trends that you're seeing with best-in-class content providers, where they focus their roadmaps, how they position their business models to compete? I think the key thing we see with best-in-class content providers is that they're starting to become very focused on verticals. So whereas in the past, content providers try to be as broad as possible within a fixed domain, like, say, technical professionals, a lot of them are seeing success in regards to focusing on one aspect or one vertical within that domain. So you see this with organizations like DataCamp, who have focused very wholeheartedly on data as a subset within, say, the Tech Pro dynamic, where they have not only built great courses and great interactive online media to aid the learning process, to teach and capabilities around learning Python using labs and things, but they're trying to create a holistic experience that also helps that individual find roles within different organizations, creating competitions so that they can effectively form communities. So to answer that question, I think there's a focus in terms of building vertical memberships. One of the other things that people are focused on as well is there's a move away from focusing on traditional web development. There's a big focus on programming, a big resurgence around programming. So core programming with things like C#, Python, Java, PHP. We're also seeing a massive focus around cybersecurity at the moment as well. I think one of the biggest macro trends I see under all of these things is that there are a lot of organizations focused on certifications at the moment. We have a theory in use at the moment that people are becoming educated within their workplaces rather than necessarily being trained in an institution and then being educated later. And that has a lot of bearings. I think there's a lot of focus on effectively evidence of skill within organizations. So when organizations are looking at LMS providers, when they're looking at which partners they want to work with, one of the things they're mindful of is how can I evidence that somebody understands this skill and that they focus their time in learning it. And certifications play a great role in that, because you've got like certified bodies like CompTIA who can certify someone as a cybersecurity professional, certify somebody within the data domain. So we are seeing an increasing popularity and focus from best-in-class creators around that specific domain. Yes, certainly. So John's asked if I can send a copy of the PDF into the slide deck into this chat. I'll do that just before the call ends. I can't see any other further questions, but I'm happy to kind of go into any further detail. We've got 5 more minutes. I'm happy to wax lyrical about anything that's kind of relatively off topic as well. Perhaps work with a lot of different learning providers. So we tend to have quite a very broad amount of insight around the dynamics of both tech pros and what's happening in the world of learning. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate your thanks. Thanks, Joe. Just addressing Jennifer's point, so she's asked around evidence of skills. What are the top practical tools and providers? I would say there is no top tool or skill mapping provider at this moment in time. It feels to me that there is a mad scramble to build up this capability. Interestingly, PACT actually developed a skill mapping platform that had assessments and mapped people's capabilities to different topics and tools. We built it in 2017, but it ended up getting shelved after the first 6 months, and now we're kind of kicking ourselves. But I'd pay attention to the market over the next year to 2 years. I certainly seeing a lot of movement towards building out that capability and making it mainstream. Cool. Thank you so much, everybody. It was really great to be able to present to you today. Thank you for your time. Thanks, Bill. That means a lot.
Awesome. I think then if we don't have any other questions, then I think we could go ahead and wrap up. Awesome. Thank you so much, Oliver, for a wonderful presentation today and for taking the time to share this all with us. And then, yeah, please look out for in the chat here for Oliver to drop the link to that report he mentioned. And we can also figure out a way to get that link to you all in a follow-up email after the but yeah, so since this concludes today's webinar, just want to thank everybody in the audience for joining in and continuing to support our webinars. And thank you so much also to Open Sesame for sponsoring today's event. So before we close out, I just want to put out there to be sure to register for our next webinar. And this one is from our talent management brand of webinars titled A Deep Dive into Talent Management's First Award Program. And that is next Wednesday, September 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. So tune in if you can and visit talentmanagement.com to find the registration page for that. But that concludes today's webinar, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their week and weekend, and please stay safe and take care of yourselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you all.